everybody? It's the Sensation Nation here. I am back for another episode of another opportunity to just put some positivity out there in the world. I am extremely excited to have my very first guest on the Sensation Nation podcast, someone that I have admired for a very long time, someone that I always talk about. He is the first African-American Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force after having served 44 years in the United States Air Force, General Larry O. Spencer, who is here with me today, the author of the book, Dark Horse. As you can see, I love it so much. I have 2 copies of it. Sir, first of all, thank you for coming on to Sensation Nation today. It's an absolute honor to have you here. If you could just kind of give us a quick rundown of your background and introduce yourself. I know we're going to talk about the horseshoe to enlisted to officer, but I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Happy New Year. And I really appreciate the opportunity and thanks for what you're doing. I mean, podcasts that are willing to take the time like yourself to put out positivity, particularly going into the new year, is very commendable. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yes, sir.
Yes, my background is, interesting, I think, and different than what most people think. I'll put it that way. So I was born and raised in Southeast DC. 6 of us kids. My mother had not finished high school. My dad was in the Army. He was an Army soldier. A lot of interesting times there, as you can imagine. Not a very good school system in Southeast, at least back then it wasn't. And I wasn't a very good student anyway. And, coming up in the 60s and early 70s, and I think to some extent it hasn't changed a lot, so like all of my friends, my goal was to be a NFL football player. Others wanted to be NBA basketball player, but that was, it was all about sports and unfortunately not much emphasis placed on academics.
Yes, sir.
And that's, and I can tell you because I speak at a lot of inner city schools today, a lot of that has not changed. As an example, I recently spoke to a group of high school students from South Side Chicago, and there were 15 students, and 14 of them, their goal was to be, professional athlete. And so again, I'm not saying that's bad, but most of us know that have already been through that the chances of entering the NBA, the NFL, professional baseball, any of those professional sports, is slim to none. Doesn't mean you can't do it.
That's right.
And I always wish those well that want to do it, but I always tell them, well, you need a plan B because if that doesn't work out, then what? And that's what, unfortunately, a lot of young folks don't have a plan B.
That's right.
But so a lot of confusion for me trying to figure things out. What's interesting is, growing up in Southeast, especially during that time, although there was no legal segregation, I felt like it was segregated. I mean, I was in a Black neighborhood, went to a Black school, went to a Black church, et cetera. And what was confusing was when I got outside of that bubble, if I can use that term, looking at doctors, when I went to the doctor, the dentist, my father went to buy a car, when they went to buy a house, none of those folks looked like me. And I had a hard time understanding why that was. And so not many mentors other than my parents. You remember back in the day, there were folks, running numbers and the classic, driving the Eldorado Cadillacs and with the white wall top. I mean, it was classic, what you've seen on some of the old blaxploitation movies. That's the way I was raised. I was raised in that. To give you an example, so but the one thing I knew how to do, and that was play football. And so I was really good, made all county, all state and all that. Had a lot of football scouts, or not scouts, but college folks coming after me to play. My grades were awful. My SAT score was awful. Not that I didn't have the intellectual capability to do better, but I had no interest, number one. And I had I didn't know how to study. I didn't have my mother hadn't finished high school. So I just didn't have the environment that was conducive to a high academic achievement. So I had all these college folks coming to my house, calling me, sending letters. I was the oldest of six. No one knew what to do. I didn't know what to do. And so the summer was running out and nothing had happened. So I found myself late summer with no plan. And so they don't have it anymore. But back then, DC had a semi-pro league. And so I started playing in that. By the way, those semi-pro leagues used to be huge.
Right.
And in fact, I don't know if you know this, this was way before your time, but one of the most famous quarterbacks in NFL history, Johnny Unitas, came out of a semi-pro league in Baltimore.
Oh, I've actually heard of him.
Yeah, so it was huge, a lot of talent, but obviously that doesn't lead to anything. And so I didn't even have a job, so I got a little job in the Census Bureau over in Suitland, Maryland. And again, I think I was a GS1. But just trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? So you'll appreciate this. So because I was in the Census Bureau, one day I decided to go over to the mall. It's over in Suitland off of Branch Avenue, those that are familiar with it. And as a sign of the times, now you're talking about the early 70s. And again, if you haven't seen movies like Superfly, the old Superfly, which is a good one, or Shaft. If you haven't seen those movies, that's what I grew up with. And so I went over to the mall and I purchased a purple jumpsuit with purple matching high platform shoes and a wide brim black hat. The whole that look.
It wasn't much longer after that I think you ended up having a discussion with a recruiter, I believe.
That's correct. So I was walking through the mall with my bag of clothes. And I just stopped outside the recruiter's office just to look at the airplanes because I thought they were kind of neat. And recruiter came out, Air Force recruiter, asked me to come in. Was I interested? And I said, we're not really. And keep in mind, back then, the early 70s, anti-Vietnam, all that stuff. So going into the military was not a popular thing to do. And so it wasn't even on my radar. Although I can tell you this, all my friends that were in high school, they always said, and this was coming off of Vietnam hadn't concluded yet, but it was close. Everybody said, hey, if you get, and back then you had to go get a draft card. And they all said, hey, if you get drafted, go join the Air Force or the Navy. So you won't have to join the Army and Marine Corps and be out on the front line. That's what all my friends told me. So and I knew I would never join the Navy because I'm not going to go sit on a ship for 6 months. But I had no interest in any of them, to be honest with you, even though my father was in the Army for 20 years. So I went in, and this is essentially the story the recruiter gave me. I'm not saying he lied, but it was certainly not practical. What he said was, so you want to play football? I said, yes. He said, well, why don't you just play for the Air Force Academy? And I was like, Air Force Academy? I didn't even know what that was. Right. And I said, I don't. So he gave me, I'm trying to think of the football player that played with the Cowboys. You
referenced it in the book.
Yeah. It'll come to me in a second. But he, it was a quarterback, and he went to the Naval Academy and played in the NFL, obviously. And so Roger Staubach. That's right. And so I said, hey, okay, that sounds good. Now, with my grades and SAT score, there's no way I was going to get in the Air Force Academy. No way. But I didn't know that. So he said, here's what we'll do. You sign up today, and one day special, you sign up today, and you will go to basic training down in San Antonio at Lackland. And when you get down there, you will give you the test for the Air Force Academy. And you will graduate from basic training, and then you'll go right to the Air Force Academy. Wow, that's what he told me. And he said, that's right. And he said, if you, and this was in the summer. So he said, if you sign up today, by this fall, you could be starting for the Air Force Academy.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, hey, that sounds great. Now, is that possible? Probably not, but I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it certainly was not practical. Right. And again, with my, excuse me?
Do you think that was intentional, or he just didn't have the knowledge?
I don't know. I don't want to say he was intentionally lying to me, but but had he taken the time to look at my grades or
Right.
ask me my SAT score, he would have said, okay, well, you got to get your grades up first, or you got to retake the SAT at least. So I don't want to accuse him of lying, but he certainly, he certainly was trying to get me in the Air Force.
Sure.
So anyway, I went in. Obviously, that didn't work, but I actually found that I actually enjoyed the Air Force, and so I graduated from there, from basic training. Went to several bases. We can talk about later how I decided to get my degree, but got my college degree, got my commission, and then went from there.
Sir, one of the quotes that you wrote in your book said, obtaining a college degree opened a world for me that I could not imagine. And
Correct.
I knew you had also referenced before in your book, and as you just stated a few seconds ago, you really had some strong aspirations, and it sounds like you were actually a really good football player on top of it. Now, not having made it to the NFL, what do you think really was the key to you wanting to go pursue a higher education after not having such great grades while you were in school?
Yeah, that's a great question because, and I'll give you an example here of a person that changed my life, that caused me to get my degree. But I've always been competitive, so that there's never been an issue there. It's just a matter of getting focused. It was a matter of getting out of my neighborhood and figuring out that I was as smart as anybody else. And it was a matter of having, and this is really key because I struggle with this with a lot of young folks today. I struggle with my own kids, and that is having having confidence in yourself, having self-awareness, self-esteem, self-worth, understanding that you can, because I mean, again, you when you grow up in an inner city like that, the environment is just beating you down,
That's right.
and you don't see anyone who looks like you that's successful, other than entertainers or and this is then, I don't know how it is exactly today, or sports figures. And so and people at best, people call you a minority,
Right.
and you're trying, and you're trying to understand why. What is it about me or folks that look like me that I don't see as successful? There were plenty of them out there, I just didn't see them, but none of them came to my school, which is why I try to talk to a lot of schools now. No one came and talked to us in our school, so I had to really get over that whole self-esteem issue. And so I was in the Air Force, and picture this now. I had done a tour. Now you can, your viewers won't be able to see me, but you can see me, and so I don't have much hair right now, at least on top of my head.
It'll be a video. It'll be a video podcast, sir. So they'll be able to see.
Okay.
I know you had a crew at one point, so.
So this was in the early 70s, and again then everybody, all of the if you were 18 to 24 in the Air Force back then, you pushed the envelope on the mustache and the hair. I mean, you just did. That's what we all did. It was immature. I shouldn't have done it. My friend shouldn't have done it, but we did. So my hair. So and the trick to it, at least if you're an African American, was you just wore a stocking cap at night, packed everything down, went to work, and then And in fact, it was so long at one point when that my wife would braid my hair on the weekend, and my hair was all the way down my back of my. It was unbelievable. I know that's hard to believe now, and I wish I could. I wish I could do that now, but I can't. So my hair was already too long. Went to Taiwan for a year, played on a basketball team. Got to go around the country and different countries playing basketball. It was great. But my friends and I made a bet when I got there. I was working in the post office. My friends and I made a bet that we could go a whole year without a haircut. And that's on top of what we already had. And 90% of us, we did.
Oh, wow.
So I come off of that tour. They send me from the assignments folks. They say, you're going to Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. I said, okay, I didn't know anything about that. And my friends started laughing. And because I didn't know that, and they don't, Air Force doesn't have it anymore. But then they were part of Strategic Air Command, the old SAC, and they were spit and polish, by the book, known for a command that doesn't mess around with dress and appearance issues. And so here I go strolling into Whiteman Air Force Base, with all out, about as far out of hair regulations you can get. And so but I was very careful to keep everything at least close during the day. Um, so not to make the story too long, I wasn't able to pack my hair down one weekend. I went into work, and I mean, it was awful. Here I am in uniform with hair all over the place. I was there early and worried to death that, my boss is going to come in and I'm going to get in all kinds of trouble. I think I was a two-striper at the time. And as I was sitting there at my desk and the door to the hallway was right in front of me, a chief master sergeant walked by, looked in, and kept going. And I sort of wiped my brow saying, man, I got away with that one. I wonder what's going to happen next. And look, this was this was before Michael Jackson made the moonwalk popular. But this chief master sergeant moonwalked back to that door, and he looked in and he was like, "You got to be kidding me! I can't believe what I'm seeing." And I said, "Chief, I didn't know what to say." And he said, "Well, get your hat." Although I couldn't get my hat on, he said, "Get your hat and come with me." And I said, "Chief," I tried to explain, that my boss will be in soon. I can't just get up and leave. He said, "Get up from your desk and come with me."
Oh.
So I got up, I grabbed my hat, I went out followed him out in the parking lot. And maybe you know the answer to this, I don't, but every chief master sergeant I've ever known had a pickup truck. I don't know why. They all had pickup trucks. So
it's standard.
Right. So I got in his pickup truck and he took me to the base barber shop. He paid the barber. He said, give him a regulation haircut. And I sit there in a chair and watched all my hair fall off on the floor and watched him with a big smile on his face. So after that was over, we got back in his pickup truck and we're riding back. And he said, look, I've seen you around, you look like you do a good job. You look like you take care of your uniform and all that. But he said, I don't understand why you don't understand how to follow Air Force regulations. And he said, believe it or not, I was young once. I get the peer pressure, but he said, if you want to get out of the Air Force and grow your hair down to the floor, have at it. But while you're in the Air Force, you need to follow the regulations.
Right.
And this was and I'm not being hyperbolic here, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, but this was clearly a changing point in my life because he then said, well, don't worry about your boss. I'll take care of that. He said, let's go by the base park. So we went up to the base park. We sit around a picnic table on the bench, and he started talking to me about Air Force regulations, why it was important for me to follow the regulations. He talked to me about my family, what my future plans were. And what was different was he talked to me in a way that no one had ever talked to me before, because even though he was a chief and I was a two-striper, he could have just chewed me out and I'd have been done with it. But it didn't come across as chewing me out. It came across to me like this guy really cares about me. And he was really genuinely wanted me to get the best out of the Air Force that I could.
Right.
And no one had ever done that with me before. And so I actually listened to him. And I said, Chief, I appreciate this. You could have kept walking, or you could have just chewed me out and told my boss, but you took the time, so I appreciate it. So he said, okay, so what are your future plans? And again, I don't know how it is now, but back then, everybody said, whether you believed it or not, I'm getting out of the Air Force. That's just what everybody said. And so I said, well, I'm going to get out after 4 years. And he said, okay, that's fine. But then what? You're married. By that time, I had 2 young kids. Where are you going to work? What are you going to do? What are you prepared to do? How are you going to support your family? And I didn't have a good answer. And I said, well, I've been thinking about going to college. He said, well, you need to start thinking about it. So we got back in his truck. I don't even know if they have them anymore. He took me to the base education office. I don't think they have those anymore. And he signed me up, or we signed up for 2 college courses on the spot. And so by the time I got back to work, in addition to having a haircut, I was enrolled in college. And by the way, when he came in, of course, my boss was there, and he walked into my boss's office and closed the door. And I thought, again, I'm in trouble. And so he came out, he said, hey, I'll see you later. He walked out, and I kept waiting for my boss to come out and chew me out, and he never did. So I got into college courses. He started stopping by once or so a week. How you doing with your classes? He went as far as to talk to some of my teachers. How's he doing? And so, and the big thing I learned, because now I'm not fully mature yet, but I'm a lot more mature than I was when I was in high school. And I started to like school,
All right.
and because I learned how to study, and I found out that I could get good grades if I wanted to. I just had to work for them.
Had to apply yourself.
Absolutely. And so I went through, I completed my degree, and this guy, by the way, this chief followed me all the way through my most of my college life, and he was at when I got selected for OTS. He was there.
Okay.
But it was he literally changed the trajectory of my life. And so, what I try to make the point in the book, and I try to tell a lot of folks is, man, I mean, having a mentor, not a mentor, but mentors, plural, is absolutely crucial.
It's crucial.
It was for the entirety of my career, and in fact, it is today. To be able to have mentors that you can run things by, and I try to get people to get a variety of mentors. Some perhaps in your chain of command, perhaps some in your career field, but those that are completely outside your career field.
Some may look like boots, some may not.
That's correct. People outside the Air Force. And by the way, a mentor is not someone who's going to tell you what you want to hear. A mentor is someone who's going to be honest with you and say, you know what, I'll give you another example. One of the things that bothers me a little bit about the Air Force today, not that I want to go back to the old days, but older days rather. But when I was vice chief, as an example, I noticed that, when I was a one striper, two striper, if I was on a base, walking across the base, and a senior NCO saw me, maybe my uniform wasn't quite right together, my shoes weren't shined or whatever, that NCO would come over and jack me up and say, look, you know what? You better get your act together.
It's a family.
That's correct. That doesn't happen anymore. What I saw as vice chief was, well, he's not in my unit, so I'm not going. Yeah, somebody else's problem. I worry about my own folks. I'm not his or her first sergeant, so I let them worry about it. That to me is a problem. If you're an NCO, particularly a senior NCO, an officer, it's part of your responsibility to make sure that like you said, your family. And what they don't know, here's the thing, they don't know that there's probably an Airman Spencer out there that needs someone like them to come over and help them out. And one of my pet peeves as a commander was always that, and look, I love lawyers, but a lot of commanders and first sergeants make decisions about their people, not lawyers.
Right.
Lawyers give advice. And what's frustrated me was someone would get in trouble, a young airman. And the first thing you hear is, okay, let's put some paper on them, let's discharge them. And I was always like, let's wait, based on my own experience, because that could have happened to me. I said, wait a minute, now is this person young, maybe immature? Look, everybody makes mistakes, we all do.
Shouldn't be a
that's correct. By the way, again, I hate to keep going back to the old days, but when I was a squadron commander at Seymour Johnson, they don't have this anymore. They had an organization called correctional custody. And they would, and I'm not exaggerating, they would find the meanest, ugliest NCO, normally a staff sergeant or tech sergeant, they could find to run this place. And it was in a dormitory. And what commanders could do was they could send you to correctional custody, say for like 2 weeks. And now I never was sent there, but I mean, I saw others there.
I was actually I was on the other side of it.
Okay.
Officer, I was an NCO over there at one point.
Right, absolutely. And you would be assigned to that person for 2 weeks. And that person's foot would be in your behind for 2 weeks. And 8 times out of 10, when folks came back from that, they said, okay, I'm rehabilitated. I'm not going back there again. But I think we've lost the art, one, of butt chewing. rather than just let's kick them out. Let's give them Article 15. Well, okay, if it comes to that, fine, but let's see if we can work with this person first. You know, I think the military in general has this unrealistic expectation that you're 17, 18 years old in high school one day doing who knows what. And overnight, or I shouldn't say overnight, 6 weeks, you're a different person. That, you know, that's just not realistic.
Right.
They expect these young folks to come into the Air Force and know how to, you know, manage their finances, to balance a checkbook, to know how to have relationships with, that they mature, that they know how to be parents, they know how to be husbands or wives or spouses.
They have to be taught.
That's correct. And I don't know why we assume that. Some are and some aren't. And so what generally happens is if you leave high school and go to college, you sort of got 4 years to work all that out. You know, you do stupid things, you hang out with the wrong crowd, you know all that stuff that happens on a college campus. And everybody on a college campus knows this person's just young and immature. And you know, so that you get away with a lot of things there that you wouldn't in the Air Force. And so one of my pet peeves was, as first sergeants and commanders, squadron commanders, you need to be able to identify who clearly has a character flaw versus someone who's just going through being young and trying to mature and just needs a little bit of guidance. And
that's a good message for everyone listening, sir, because I hope that your voice and the lessons that you're giving right now is going to be spread throughout, because I think one piece, if I could add, is that some of these supervisors that we have today may not necessarily be aware of that. And I think that you mentioned that. So they need to hear this kind of information from you so they know how to train those younger folks coming up.
No, absolutely. In fact, when I was a squadron commander, my goal was, and this I'm not suggesting anybody else do this, but my goal as a squadron commander was to never have to give anyone an Article 15 or discharge anyone for behavior reasons. And I went through 3 years as squadron commander and never did it.
Oh, no kidding.
Never did it, because I was very proactive, and my first sergeant was as well. So I was in the dormitory. You know, when I saw my folks downtown in the mall, I talked to them, and I got to know them. I was a big believer in leadership by walking around. So I went around to see everybody every day, and I talked to them, and especially the younger folks. And we had had young 18-year-olds coming to the squadron. I sit them down and said, look, here's what can happen to you. Here's what happened to me. You don't want to be in that. I would say, I don't want to have to discipline you that way, but I will if I have to. Right. And so if you feel like you're going down that road, you need to come and see me, or you need to come and see the first sergeant. And so I came close a couple of times. I had to call the people in and, use the art of butt chewing. But that's as far as I had to go. So again, I don't mean this the way it sounds, but I hope commanders and first sergeants aren't just being lazy. Right. Because the easy thing to do would be call them in, here's a letter of counseling, you know the drill, build up a file, discharge them. But that could be another Airman Spencer, and that's what bothers me. That's right. Not that I'm any better than anybody else, but I mean it could be some airman out there who has potential.
Yes, but you had someone step in and guide you and give you that motivation that you needed. And I would imagine, sir, just like you're taking the time to do this with me right now and spread the word, your intent is to give back and make sure that you're actually getting your message out to people to do the same thing. I know it has not been easy. I would imagine, based on what I've read and based on what I believe. There's one part in particular in chapter 1 of your book. It's a section called "Our Colors Allowed Here." Our colors allowed here.
Right.
Sir, I know I've heard different opinions. Some will say, "Hey, I am not, an African-American 4-star general. I am a 4-star general who happens to be African-American." I've heard different variations of that. Right. But I just want to ask you, sir, what did it take for you to overcome, being a minority in an extremely large organization where there weren't a lot of people that looked like you? And in this particular portion of that chapter, I believe your mother had to make a phone call to the movie, right, if you were allowed to even be there.
Yeah, that's hard to fathom today. And I know a lot of folks, listening to this or watching this can identify with it. But again, when I was a kid, they over in Southeast, a new movie theater was built, and my mother had to, and I was there when she called. She had to call, and using the vernacular back then, she had to ask them, were colored people allowed in the theater? And the answer was, if I heard that answer today, I'd be incensed. But my mother was not, because the answer to her was, yes, colored people can come in the theater as long as they dress nice and behave themselves. Again, I would take that as a "you got to be kidding me" statement today. To her, it was completely normal because she grew up in a more segregated environment than I did. So, no, you're right now, and I hope people will understand when I say this, because some people don't understand it. But I know you've heard this. I mean, my father, my mentors told me that I would have to work harder than my counterparts to get the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that as an indictment on anybody. I don't believe the Air Force is racist, or I don't believe any of that. But that's the way I was raised, rightly or wrongly.
Pressure is there.
And so I tried to work my butt off everywhere I went. And so there's a lot of things that you can see in the book that happened to me that were not appropriate. But my view was, okay, then what am I going to do about it? And now, I was very clear in the book that I get asked the question all the time, were you discriminated against? Did you experience things? And the answer is twofold. One is, did my supervisors or my first sergeants discriminate against me because of my race? No. All of my bosses were very, very supportive of me personally and helped me. So the answer is no. Did I experience discrimination and see a whole lot of inappropriate things? Absolutely. All the time. And I got a lot of examples of those in the book. But just I was reminded of this the 2 weeks ago, because I had dinner at the chief of staff's house, and I reminded him that it was in his house that he lives in today, where my wife and I were there at a function where one of the spouses came up to my wife and asked her to go get them a drink, because they assumed she was part of the staff. But that happened to us all the time. Yeah. So what are you going to do? I mean, you can get mad about it. Okay. But what I tried to do was, get in a position that I can make it better for others. I mean, I can't fix it. I can't fix the whole thing. But if I get myself in a leadership position, then I can make sure those who are in my unit are going to be, I don't care what their race is or their gender, they're going to be treated fairly, equally, and I'm going to fight for every one of them. That if they have potential, they know I'm going to fight for them and try to get them promoted.
I appreciate that, sir. And being mindful of your time, there's two other quick points that I want to touch on. We've got about 5 minutes or so left. At the end of your book, and I don't want to give away too much so that people can still go and read it on their own, but you highlighted some life lessons at the end of your book. A couple of them I'll just point out. You've got, even a dark horse can succeed. Be an ant, not a grasshopper. Leadership matters. Be kind. Prioritize your career and family. I don't need to run down the entire list, but out of that list, which one do you think is the one that you would drive home the most to the people that are listening and watching?
Oh, wow. That's a great question that no one's ever asked me, because they weren't necessarily in priority order. Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in today's environment, when our country is so divided, and we're as we speak, we're watching what's going on in Congress, and they're just people are at each other's throats, and no one talks to anybody anymore, and no one listens to anybody anymore. I would say being kind to people and treating people as you would want to be treated, I think is really, really important.
I like that.
If I have 5 grandkids. One of them, my granddaughter, because my daughter lived with us for about the first 5 years of her life, we practically raised her. And I remember dropping her off at daycare, and as soon as we got out of the car and got inside the daycare, her eyes lit up. She charged in there, and there was kids of every nationality and ethnic group you can think of. But you know what? Nobody cared.
Right.
She knew that I kind of knew she was African American, but it didn't matter. And she knew she was a girl and not a boy, but it didn't matter.
Right.
She charged in there, and they were all little kids like her, and they all just wanted to play with each other.
I love it. I love it.
What bothers me is that, and I tell my daughter to be careful about this, at some point in her lifetime, someone's going to say, you know what, you're Black, and you can't do certain things, or we believe this about you because you're Black, based on stereotypes or unconscious bias. Or someone's going to say, you know what, you're a female, you can't do this, or you can't do that. And that's we adults do that. We aren't born like that.
That's right.
And so I think if we could somehow break that cycle, that, you know what, we're just going to decide to be kind to each other, and regardless of where we come from, regardless of our ethnicity, and as long as the person is decent to me, I'm going to be decent to them. I wish if we could do that, I think our country and our world would be a lot better off. So I hate to prioritize those because I think all of them are important, but today I think that one's really, really relevant. I'll put it that way.
Well, no, I appreciate that, sir. I do want to offer the last minute and a half or so, do you have any way for folks to contact you, any social media platforms, or if there's any way that people can go buy this book in particular that you'd like for them to go see?
Sure. So they can get the book from any of the major outlets, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any of those. It's out there. But I do have a website. It's GeneralLarrySpencer.com. You can also order the book through there. A lot of people will through that website will contact me and say, hey, I'd like to sign copy. And so I will do that as well. I'll sign a copy and send it to them. So they can contact me through my website. But again, the purpose of the book was to hopefully to inspire and motivate others, particularly those who aren't born into a privileged environment, that are struggling through trying to figure out how they're going to be successful. I hope the book does that, because that was the purpose of it.
It certainly did it for me. I've got my 2 signed copies. Go get yours. And General Larry O. Spencer, sir, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on SimSation Nation. It's been an absolute honor, and I hope this is beneficial to many people out there.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.